The first time I saw the orange cones lined up across my gravel road like some kind of barricade, I thought it was a prank. Or maybe a utility crew forgot to clean up. But then I spotted the smug little sign zip tied to a post, private HOA property. No commercial access. Violators will be towed. That's when I knew this wasn't a joke. This was a power play. And it was coming from none other than Tanya Whitmore, our HOA president, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Now let me back up a bit. My name's Kellan Brooks. I run a small excavation company, dump trucks, backhoes, the whole deal. Been working out of my workshop and storage lot out behind my house for 15 years. The gravel road that runs past my property? I built it, graded it, maintained it. I even had the original plat map and land deed filed with the county to prove it. That road was mine. Not shared. Not easement. Mine. But Tanya didn't care about legal documents. Tanya cared about aesthetics and property values and any excuse to swing around her clipboard like a sword. I found her standing at the entrance to the road, arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd just sucked on a lemon. "You need to move those trucks, Kellan," she said, like she was talking to a teenager caught skipping class. "No," I said flatly, holding up a copy of the land deed. "This road isn't HOA property. It's part of my lot. See this line? That's my boundary." Tanya didn't even glance at it. "The trucks are an eyesore, and they're bringing down values on Maple Glen Drive. We voted to restrict heavy machinery access on HOA land," I said, "which this isn't." Her eyes narrowed. "I've already called the tow company. They'll be here by noon." That's when I knew she'd gone completely off the rails. Sure enough, 2 hours later, a flatbed tow truck came crawling up the hill like it had a death wish. The driver, a kid barely old enough to rent a car, hopped out and looked at me nervously. "You Kellan Brooks?" "Yup." He looked at the truck parked on the gravel lot. "I was told to remove that dump truck." "You got a court order?" "Nah, just a call from the HOA president." I laughed. "You touch that truck and I promise you'll be explaining to a judge why you trespassed on private property." The kid backed off fast. Tanya, still standing nearby, turned bright red. "You'll regret this, Kellan," she hissed. "The HOA board will escalate." "Good," I said, "because I've been waiting for a chance to show this whole neighborhood what you really are." I didn't tell her then, but I'd already filed paperwork with the county a week earlier to register the road as a private commercial access route. Tanya and her goons had no idea that the only access road to their new nature trail project, the one they were so proud of, cut right across that same road. And I owned every inch of it. The next morning, I poured black coffee into a thermos and watched from my porch as the neighborhood crew gathered at the far trailhead. Bright green vests, wheelbarrows, and a stack of lumber meant only one thing: they were finally breaking ground on the Maple Glen Nature Walk. The board had been hyping it up for months, promising benches, birdhouses, and a quaint wooden bridge to connect the neighborhood to the creek. Problem was, their only access to that stretch ran straight through my land, specifically the road Tanya tried to claim the day before. I waited until they rolled in a rented skid steer and started unloading tools. Then I walked down the hill and stood just beyond the cones they'd left up overnight. Tanya was barking orders at 2 volunteers trying to assemble a post hole digger. "Morning," I said. She spun around, clearly not thrilled to see me. "Unless you're here to apologize, Kellan, I have nothing to say to you." "You're gonna want to hear this," I said, holding up a manila envelope. "Is that another one of your fake maps?" she snapped, folding her arms. "Nope. This one's from the county registrar's office. Certified and time-stamped," I said, handing it to one of the volunteers. "Go ahead, take a look." Tanya snatched it from his hands and skimmed the top page. Her face changed halfway down the second paragraph. "You registered the road as a commercial access route?" "Correct. And since it's private land, any non-commercial activity needs my written approval to proceed." "You can't do that," she said, voice rising. "Oh, I can. And I did. Yesterday." She looked at the work crew behind her, then turned back. "We already signed a contract with the landscaping company. They're scheduled to pour concrete this weekend. Then they'll be trespassing. And if they so much as scrape a shovel across that road, I'll see them and you in court. But this trail was approved by the board." she said, her voice straining under the weight of her own logic. Good for them. Didn't realize the HOA board now overrides land ownership laws, I said. A few of the volunteers had stopped working, watching the exchange with open curiosity. One guy in a camo ball cap nudged his buddy and muttered something that made them both grin. Tanya hissed under her breath and stormed off toward her car. I stayed long enough to watch them pack up the skid steer, load the tools, and pull out. No one said a word. They just avoided eye contact like kids busted sneaking into a movie. By the end of the week, word had spread. I didn't have to say much. People started asking questions on their own. Why did the board approve a project without checking property lines? Why hadn't the HOA consulted with residents who lived along the trail path? Why was Tanya so quick to involve a tow company on land she didn't even control? It wasn't long before I got a knock on my door from a man in a charcoal jacket and polished shoes. Name was Darren Klein, an attorney hired by the landscaping outfit the HOA had contracted. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. We're hoping to resolve this without legal action, he said after I invited him in. Should have thought of that before your client accepted work on restricted access, I replied. He nodded politely and placed a folder on my table. They're offering to revise the project. Reroute the trail to avoid your property. They'll even pay to install a privacy fence during construction. And what about Tanya? He hesitated. The board president acted outside the scope of her authority. That's being handled internally. I leaned back in my chair. Not good enough. What are you looking for? I opened my desk drawer and slid him a flash drive. This has 6 months of security footage, including audio of her directing unauthorized access, giving false statements to the towing company, and this is the kicker, ordering volunteers to mark utility flags on land that was never surveyed. He stared at the drive like it had just grown teeth. Are you saying she falsified a locate request? I'm saying she told people there was one when there wasn't. And then she spray-painted markers along my irrigation trench. That's a felony under state law. He blinked slowly. You're pressing charges? Already did. Sheriff's Department took my statement this morning. Investigator's name is Lacey Thorne. You'll probably hear from her soon. He swallowed. Noted. As he stood to leave, I added, tell your client to put everything in writing next time. And maybe don't take project directions from someone who thinks a clipboard makes her invincible. 2 days later, a cruiser parked in front of Tanya's house. The deputy walked her out calmly, no cuffs, no shouting, but the neighborhood grapevine didn't miss a beat. By the weekend, someone had printed out a copy of the county plat map and taped it to the community bulletin board with a big red arrow pointing to the words Private Access K. Brooks. Underneath, someone had scribbled oops in Sharpie. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the following Monday. I wasn't invited, but I didn't have to be. Half the neighborhood showed up demanding answers. Turns out Tanya had bypassed board approval for several recent actions, including the trail contract, the towing attempt, and a budget reallocation meant to cover aesthetic improvements that conveniently matched the quote for the landscaping work. By Tuesday, she'd resigned. A week later, the newly appointed interim president, a soft-spoken retired firefighter named Glenn, dropped by with a peace offering, a 6-pack of local beer and a handwritten apology from the board. He promised they'd be reviewing their bylaws and launching a proper audit of all projects started in the last 2 years. About time someone lit a fire under them, Glenn said, shaking his head. She had us all fooled. Not all of you, I said, raising a bottle. The cones were gone. The signs too. And the gravel road? Still mine. I didn't plan on digging deeper. I figured Tanya's resignation and the trail reroute were enough of a win. But then, 3 weeks after the whole mess, I got a certified letter from the county assessor's office. Inside was a request for property access and inspection tied to a revaluation due to commercial activity increase. That caught me off guard. Property taxes don't get randomly reassessed unless someone files a petition, and this one had been flagged for expedited review. I drove straight downtown to pull the documents myself. The clerk behind the desk handed me a thin file with my name on it. I flipped it open and immediately saw the signature at the bottom of the complaint, Ronald P. Ellsworth, HOA Treasurer. I didn't even know what the guy looked like. He never showed up to board meetings and his name barely came up during the Tanya fiasco. But apparently, he'd filed a formal accusation claiming I was operating a large-scale commercial depot on residential zoned land and had modified property boundaries to obstruct community development. He was trying to get my tax rate tripled. I left the office and called my cousin Ray. She was a zoning enforcement officer in a neighboring county and had a knack for digging through bureaucratic garbage. Sounds like someone's trying to trigger a code enforcement sweep, she said. They hit you with a tax bump, then come and claiming you're non-compliant. Seen it happen with farms and workshops. Usually ends with fines or forced relocation. Can they do that? Not if your zoning and land use are clean. But it only works if no one pushes back. Most folks just pay the new rate and never realize they've been targeted. I drove home with my jaw clenched so tight it made my temples throb. Ronald hadn't even come to me directly, he was trying to bury me in red tape from the shadows. That night, I pulled every permit, utility bill, and zoning approval I'd ever filed. My records were spotless. I even had a 20-year-old letter from the original county planner confirming my land designation. But the more I looked, the more something else stood out. Back when the HOA first formed, they submitted a plat overlaid that included future road plans and green space expansions. One of those plans cut diagonally across what's now my access road. It was filed but never approved. No signatures. No stamps. Just a rogue document sitting in the archives. And Ronald had used that document as the basis for his complaint. The next day, I visited the county zoning board and requested a hearing to challenge the reassessment. They gave me a date 2 weeks out. That gave me just enough time to gather what I needed and find out who else Ronald had been messing with. Turns out I wasn't the only one. A couple named the Duprees lived across the creek from where the trail was supposed to go. They'd recently gotten a letter claiming they'd encroached on HOA land with their garden shed. Except their property predated the HOA by 40 years. When I knocked on their door, the husband, Henry, invited me in without hesitation. I knew this had to be connected to you, he said, handing me a folder of his own. Inside was a copy of a cease and desist letter signed by Tanya but dated 2 months after she'd already stepped down. That's not legal, I said. Sure isn't. But Ron's been using her name on forms and letters ever since she left. Claimed she was still assisting with transition operations. We were about to call a lawyer. I took photos of everything. Letters, envelopes, even the envelope's postmark showing it had been mailed the week after the board publicly announced her resignation. Back home, I started building a case. I compiled timestamps, signatures, meeting minutes, and emails. Ray helped me draft a formal report complete with a list of violations and forged documents, and we submitted it to the county prosecutor's office. It took less than 72 hours for someone to take notice. 3 investigators from the district attorney's office showed up at Ronald's place with a search warrant. According to a neighbor who worked nights and didn't miss much, they confiscated 2 laptops, a filing cabinet, and a stack of homeowner complaint forms, half of them unsigned or filled out in the same handwriting. I didn't see Ronald again after that day. His house went dark. No porch lights. No cars in the driveway. A week later, a moving truck pulled up and left with only a few pieces of furniture. But the fallout was far from over. The county put a freeze on all HOA projects and opened an audit on the association's financial dealings. And when the audit report came out, it read like a how-to manual for suburban fraud. Ronald had been funneling HOA dues into a shell account marked Land Development Reserve. Over 5 years, he'd moved close to $78,000 into that account, using it to pay private contractors for consulting and filing fees on unapproved projects. One of those contractors was a property surveyor from 2 towns over, the same guy who'd filed the fake trail alignment plans. The same guy who'd signed off on the bogus complaint against me. The DA charged Ronald with 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of falsifying public records. They also opened a civil action to seize the misused funds and return them to the HOA. As for Tanya, she got pulled back into the spotlight when investigators discovered she'd used her position to greenlight Ronald's reserve fund without board approval. She faced a civil suit and a court order banning her from holding any position on a homeowners association for 10 years. The board was dissolved within a month. The county appointed a temporary oversight committee made up of residents, and they voted unanimously to suspend all HOA enforcement powers until a full reorganization could be completed. I didn't run for any positions, but I did agree to lead a zoning education night at the fire hall where I walked folks through how to read a plat map and file a property line dispute. The new interim president, a retired school teacher named Marla, stopped by afterward. "You know, there's a lot of folks who thought you were just being difficult," she said. "Now they're asking you for advice." "Funny how that works," I said. She gave me a thin folder. "This is the final letter from the county. Your commercial road designation is officially recognized and recorded. No future HOA can touch it." I took it and nodded. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The cones never came back. The fake complaints stopped, and the gravel stayed just where it belonged. Mine. I was sweeping the shop floor when the call came in. It was Detective Lacey Thorne, not the casual kind of call, either. Her voice had that clipped edge, like she didn't have time for small talk. "Mr. Brooks, are you available to come down to the station this afternoon? We've uncovered something during the investigation into the HOA account fraud. You're going to want to see it." I agreed, no hesitation. By the time I walked into the precinct's side entrance, the sun was already low and bleeding through the blinds in horizontal bars. Lacey met me in the hallway holding a folder with a red seal across the front. "We seized devices from Ronald Ellsworth's residence and office," she began, opening the folder as we walked. Among the files was an encrypted hard drive. "Our techs cracked it yesterday. What we found ties directly into your case." We stepped into an interview room. She laid out a stack of printed emails, bank statements, and a crude map annotated with handwritten notes. "What am I looking at?" I asked. She tapped the map first. "This is a proposed annexation plan, not filed officially, not even close, but it outlines a phased property absorption scheme. Your lot, the Duprees, and 2 others were marked as target acquisitions." I looked at the dates. Everything was 6 to 12 months old. "They were planning to take my land? Not through eminent domain or any legal channel," she said. "Their plan was to trigger a code violation domino effect. Fines, liens, tax reassessments. Once the financial pressure mounted, they'd offer to buy out the properties at below market value." I stared at the papers. A note next to my lot read, "High resistance will require leverage. Explore access interference." "They tried to block my trucks as a test run," I muttered. "Exactly," she said. "That incident was the first move." When it didn't work, they escalated behind the scenes. She slid over a copy of a forged utility complaint. This was submitted under a fake resident named Daryl Jensen. "No such person lives in your neighborhood." It claimed you had installed illegal drainage piping under your lot, threatening shared infrastructure. "That's a lie. We know. County records show your irrigation was installed 5 years before the HOA even existed. But if we hadn't caught it, this would have triggered a zoning violation. Enough of those, and the county would have considered a seizure under public nuisance codes." I leaned back, stunned. "But here's the kicker," she said, flipping to the last page. "That fake complaint? It was traced to Tanya's home IP address. And the bank account used to pay the filing fee? That was linked to the same slush fund Ronald managed." I kept my voice steady. So she was still involved after resigning. In more than just name, she helped orchestrate everything. The 2 of them weren't just mismanaging HOA funds, they were planning a land grab. I exhaled through my nose, slowly. "What happens now?" "We're issuing additional charges this week: conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying government records, and attempted unlawful property acquisition. Tanya's already in custody. Ronald will be arraigned again. I asked one question that had been gnawing at me. Who else knew? She paused. So far, no evidence implicates the other board members. It looks like Tanya and Ronald kept this close. But if anything else surfaces, we'll pursue it. After I left the station, I didn't go home right away. I drove up to the overlook past the ridge, where you could see the whole valley stretch out between the hills. My shop, my access road, the woods behind it, all of it sat quiet, untouched. For now. 2 weeks passed. The court proceedings moved fast, thanks to the mountain of evidence. Tanya pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Ronald tried to drag it out, but eventually folded once the state filed civil forfeiture. Between restitution and legal fees, he lost everything but the clothes on his back. The county held a public restitution hearing in the community hall. It was packed. Glenn, the former firefighter who'd stepped in temporarily, stood up front with a clipboard, not as president, but as the spokesperson for the HOA's restructured oversight committee. "This is about transparency," he said. "Every resident whose dues were misused will receive a refund. Every property targeted by false complaints will have their records cleared." He called each of us up one by one. When my name came, I walked up and accepted a certified letter confirming that my land had been removed from any pending reassessment and that the fraudulent complaints had been formally expunged. When I turned to leave, Glenn leaned in slightly. "There's talk of dissolving the HOA entirely. Too much damage. Too much mistrust." I nodded. "Might be the best thing for everyone." "I think so too," he said. "But before that happens, we're putting in rules that require a full homeowner vote before any future board can even propose land adjustments or zoning complaints. No more surprises." By the end of that month, the HOA officially announced its dissolution. The neighborhood voted 86% in favor of shutting it down. The legal team filed the papers with the state, and the rest of the funds were divided evenly among the residents after settling all debts. The neighborhood changed. People started talking again, not just waving from driveways, but real conversations. I got invited to barbecues, even asked to help install a new community garden near the old trailhead. The Duprees donated a bench from their backyard. I graded the soil and laid the gravel path myself. No one asked me to. I just did it. One afternoon, Marla stopped by with a clipboard in hand, but not the kind Tanya used to carry. This one was plain, wooden, no stickers or labels. She handed me a single sheet of paper. "We're forming a volunteer committee," she said. "Not an HOA. Just a maintenance group. No dues, no power trips. You interested?" I scanned the list. It wasn't full of rules or restrictions. Just a rotating schedule for snow plowing, lawn cleanup, and seasonal projects. "Yeah," I said. "Count me in." She smiled. "Figured you'd say that." As she walked back to her car, I looked out over the gravel road one more time. Still solid. Still mine. But now something else too. Respected. Not because I fought for it, but because I refused to let anyone take it. And everyone knew it.